Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is one of my favorite games ever made. It's fast, loud, stupid, and incredibly fun to play.
Means the DNA of the soul.
It unfortunately is also one of those games that exists in a really awkward spot in regards to ever getting a potential sequel. Whether it be due to its co-development between Platinum and Kojima Productions, where its own story ends as a part of its series, or even due to just Konami being itself, I think most people who are fans of this game are pretty resigned to the idea that a sequel to this game is just never going to happen, for one reason or another. But what if the game actually did get a sequel? Furthermore, what if that sequel itself was actually a decade old at this point, and you never knew it existed, mainly because it just looks entirely different. The soul is still there, but it's not exactly the same game, and furthermore fleshed out some of its gameplay elements, even better than the previous entry. And what if, just as the little cherry on top, the sequel in question just so happened to feature Optimus Prime? That game is Transformers Devastation. I feel like I owe it to this game to give it a proper acknowledgement as one that has managed to keep me consistently entertained for the last 8 months or so. But before doing that, I ought to preface this by talking about how over the course of this year, my interest in Transformers overall has had a resurgence like never before. I've been interested in Transformers ever since I was about 7 years old and watched the first 3 Michael Bay movies as they came out. The pinnacle of cinema, I know.
I did not come out here to see that.
As time has gone on, I found more and more things to dislike about the movies with every subsequent watch, as most people do. While I wouldn't say I hate all of them, but certainly some of them,
what is that?
They, at the very least, had managed to make my relationship with Transformers as a series a very complicated one, full of hopes and disappointments over and over again. While the live-action movies feel like they exist in a very unstable place at the moment, what really started this newest wave of fanaticism for me was the release of Transformers 1, an animated movie that, while rebooting the series for what feels like the 8th time just in movies alone, still feels wholly unique and manages to reinvigorate my interest in the series. While each different iteration of the Transformers has varying strengths and weaknesses in whatever series or medium that they exist in, I think that people always have an interest in the characters of Transformers and have a desire to see them handled in a way that is done well and compelling. And I would say that 1 manages to achieve that better than most other mediums that the series has been in, while also being incredibly accessible and entertaining. My summary of all of this is that you should go watch the movie, because clearly not enough people did at the time of its release. And if you have already seen it, well then watch it again or something and tell your friends. What makes me more excited than anything else is to see how people who are not fans of the series feel about it, because it might just turn them into one. After that movie came out, I started to become far more invested than I ever had been before, inspiring me to go back and watch the entirety of the original Transformers cartoon, otherwise known as Generation 1, which I had personally never done before. As you would expect from a cartoon made for network television released in the 80s, and whose purpose was above all to market a line of toys to children, it's not always perfect and clearly isn't the most compelling thing ever made.
Wrong! He withdrew to fight Autobots another day! You haven't heard the last of Megatron!
But despite that, there is still a likable and charming energy that the show has. If anything, it works. It has fun and entertaining characters that are cool and have memorable personalities and outstanding character designs. It got me to want to go out and find toys of the Transformers that have steadily started to take up way too much of my desk space. As far as video games have been concerned, most of my affiliation with them had been playing some of the games based on the movies when they came out, back before I would say I was really into video games as a whole. Those games are ones that I haven't had much of an interest in revisiting, but I have had a desire to check out a few games that have been on my radar for quite some time now, those being the Cybertron games and Devastation. I may have something to say about the Cybertron games at some point in the future, particularly once I finish the second of the 2, but the one I was really interested in and wanted to talk about, obviously, was Devastation. Released in 2015 by Activision and produced by Platinum Games, Transformers Devastation is a fast-paced hack-and-slash action game featuring the Transformers based heavily on their G1 appearances. Over the last couple of years, I've started to become a lot more of a fan of these sorts of games. My tastes aren't ever especially based on genres, but it's kinda hard to go wrong with these games, at least based on the ones that I've played, including Metal Gear Rising and the Devil May Cry series. My growing interest in these kinds of games isn't really something something that I've talked about in detail, but that's mainly just because I don't have a whole lot to say about them. The games are good, but I'm not especially good at them. They're fun, the gameplay is cool, and that's mostly what you're here for, aside from a rather explosive tone and personality often found within them. I could, if need be, write a big misinformed dissertation on the merits of hack and slash games, but I'm a little too busy having fun playing them to attempt to put it all into words. My point in all of this is to say that if you told me that there was a game that basically did Metal Gear Rising Revengeance, but with G1 Transformers, I'd be frothing at the mouth over it, and that's exactly what happened. While a high-energy hack and slash is not immediately what comes to mind when thinking of what would make for the most ideal Transformers video game, it does wind up sounding like an incredibly fun idea that I would cobble up one afternoon that would never see the light of day. While the more traditional third-person shooters of the Cybertron games may better suit the IP of Transformers overall, Devastation sticks out to me way more as a game by just being incredibly fun. One thing I will say that is a tragedy is that, like the Cybertron games, Devastation is not currently available for purchase on any online storefront. Once the license between Hasbro and Activision expired, all of the aforementioned games were pulled from storefronts and now currently only exist for people who either purchased the games digitally before that point, or only as physical copies.
The pirate is free. You are a pirate.
I won't completely surrender all hope that there could ever be a renewal to that license in the future, enabling them to either be re-released or remade in the future, but I'm not counting on it, even less so for the Cybertron games in particular. Back to the game, first and foremost, I wanted to make a mention of this game's visual presentation. The decision to lean into the more cartoonish style of the blocky G1 Transformers designs manages to make the very simple character models still look really charming and endearing, and the more Japanese style of making them fight basically like anime characters makes this game so much fun to watch and play. Though admittedly it's not always the greatest. Compared to other games released at the time, there are a lot of moments where it feels like the game had a more limited budget compared to previous Platinum games, along with some instances and cutscenes that just look outright poor. But with that being said, I do still love this game's overall visual style. The cel-shaded look of the game and its character models makes everything pop out rather stylistically while keeping things simple, and it isn't reliant on a heavy amount of detail, which aside from just being charming, also helps maintain the flow of the rather manic combat. It's certainly not always perfect, but it feels like the right design decision for a game like this, particularly when made on what feels like a smaller budget. While there are other iterations of the Transformers that take on new design cues to match the tone of whatever media that they're depicted in, utilizing the G1 character designs is a hard thing to argue against if it doesn't clash with the tone. It's the most classic, and as time has gone on has become my personal favorite design for the Transformers at large. All of these design decisions just sync up with each other really well. I also really love the music for this game. Much like Metal Gear Rising, it manages to have boss fight themes that do a great job of suiting the fast-paced nature of this game, while representing particular characters and are rather fitting themes for them specifically. And I love how many of the boss themes feature splits shifting into a second phase with more intense guitar riffs. My personal favorites are the themes for the Insecticons, Megatron, Motormaster, Shockwave, the Constructicons, and of course, my favorite G1 Transformer, Soundwave. Also, despite not being a boss theme, I feel like I should make note of the Cargo Lift theme for being shockingly one of the best in the entire game. I also really enjoyed the music outside of just the boss battles, which included works done by Vince DiCola, who composed a lot of music for the 1986 movie. This is another game where upon hearing the soundtrack, it became the only thing I would listen to on repeats for several months at a time, and still do pretty often. A few of the more prominent voice actors are also here to reprise their roles, like Peter Cullen as Optimus Prime, Dan Gilvezan as Bumblebee, Frank Welker as Megatron alongside Michael Bell as Sideswipe and Scrapper, and Greg Berger as Grimlock.
Thundercracker, you dumb and weak. Me crush you.
Not every vocal performance is perfect all of the time, but on the whole, the game achieves what it wants to, which is to make this game feel like the G1 cartoon. While the story of this game isn't really much to write home about and is very short, it does feel like one of the multi-part episodes of Season 2 of the original cartoon, just blown up and made really dramatic. Whether or not that is all a positive trait is up to you, but I love it personally. I don't really have a natural way to bring this up since I don't have a large segment focused on the story since there isn't much to talk about, but I just wanted to say that I really like Optimus's whole speech at the end of the game. It's a neat perspective to have on the Autobots at large and hints at an interesting shift in their outlook following the events of this game since they differ from the original cartoon. These days Optimus is a character all about speeches, but this one sticks out to me since it highlights the underrated quality of putting Transformers storylines on Earth, since at their core, the Autobots and Optimus himself are at their best when they have someone weaker than themselves to protect. Removing Transformers from Earth not only robs the robots of their scale, but also the truest fundamental difference between the two factions, in my opinion. With all that out of the way, we can finally talk about the gameplay. When compared to some of the hack-and-slash games I've played, this game is very simple in terms of how it works and what's required of the player, and Metal Gear Rising is very much the same way. As much as I love that game, you can pretty reliably button mash your way to victory through most of it. And between the absurdly broken parry and Zandatsu mechanic, along with some forgiving timing windows, I wouldn't say that the game is all too insanely difficult. Nor is it nearly as complicated or have the same level of depth as some of the Devil May Cry games from 3 and onward. But there's nothing really wrong with that. I have an incredible amount of fun anyway. I'm comparing Devastation to Revengeance specifically a lot, but I feel like there's a really good reason for that. Aside from being developed also by Platinum Games, only 2 years apart from each other and featuring some similar in-game resources, the games also share the same director as well, and likely some other internal staff. So to me, this game is basically a Revengeance sequel, but just based on a different IP.
Devastator.
And after beating Devastation for the first time, I decided to go back through Revengeance and play through all of the difficulties again before doing the same with Devastation. Twice. I have no definitive proof of this, and all of this is just speculation, but I have to imagine that there are some kind of A and B teams at Platinum, with the A team focusing on games like Bayonetta and Wonderful 101, games that Hideki Kamiya has a personal hand in making, while the B team is left to the more collaborative efforts, like these 2 games and others like Nier Automata. Whether or not that's for certain, that's basically how I'm judging this game. Transformers Devastation comparatively is also very simple to play, though in some slightly different ways. If the gimmick in Revengeance was Blade Mode, in this game it's transforming into a vehicle, which, like, duh. There are a few different vehicle attacks that you can use as finishers for executing combos, and there are a number of enemies that have to be rendered vulnerable with a rush attack, which is when you perform an attack while at top speed in vehicle mode. It's really cool, though it becomes less exciting the more you have to do it. As a side note, I actually find that compared to other Transformers games I played, including the Cybertron games, this is the one where I utilize vehicle transformations the most. Between the exploration of the more open map, its inclusion in combos, and its necessities for certain enemies. It's kind of funny, compared to when I played War for Cybertron, where I really only transformed either for dedicated segments designed for being a vehicle, or because I ran out of ammunition for my other weapons. But one of the most dominating game mechanics is the dodge that's executed by pressing the vehicle button in response to an attack, and puts you in what I assume is a witch time-like state. I wouldn't know, I haven't played Bayonetta yet. I'm not a lesbian. Female. Between this and using strong vehicle attacks to close out combos, the gameplay results in you mashing buttons a lot while spamming the right bumper at every given opportunity. But I will say though, despite this game having a dedicated dodge button as opposed to the deliberately convoluted dodge button combinations of both Metal Gear Rising and Devil May Cry, I wouldn't say that it suddenly makes it easy, especially on the harder difficulties. The game kind of recognizes that and compensates by throwing a bunch of stuff at you all at once. This game can be kind of overwhelming at times, on top of the already incredibly fast pace that it moves at. I personally like it, but I can imagine it not being everyone's thing. I think between this game and Revengeance, I actually do find it to be a bit more difficult, if only due to how much more infrequent healing items are, since they are almost entirely reliant on drops. For basic attacks, there are a lot of different button combinations for executing moves, more than I could ever possibly remember. And I found that when every combo could be closed with a vehicle attack that knocked back or hit enemies the hardest, I often resorted to just using moves that would end combos the quickest, which would mostly be just spamming the light attack button. It's not the most challenging, but it's fun and flashy, and even then I feel like I'm underselling it all a bit. In a game like Devil May Cry, a lot of your increasing depth of gameplay comes in the form of more weapons with unique moves that you purchase as you progress through the game, and Revengeance is alternatively mostly in the form of purchasable stat upgrades. Devastation has these sorts of things too, to a degree, but its depth, at least those significant enough to really influence how your gameplay changes, mainly comes in the form of its varied characters and the much greater variety of weapon choices, which really work for this game specifically. A highlight I feel like this game has is the usage of its firearms. Of the hack-and-slash games I've played, so far they feel like some of the best implemented guns I've seen, since they very quickly put you in a position where you can fire them easily and with moderate precision, and also come in a decent variety of types so they don't feel all exactly the same. They have ammo, so using them isn't a completely mindless thing that you do only to maintain a combo or juggle an enemy, and the game tends to have a pretty consistent behind-the-back perspective most of the time, so it's not a completely jarring camera change once you use them. They maintain the flow of the game without feeling completely inconsequential or broken. It's nice. One of my personal favorites is the old Sentinel Splatter 9000.
No, Optimus!
A mechanic that I do feel like is worth mentioning briefly is Overdrive. No, not that Overdrive. The other Overdrive from a 2015 game with giant robots that is pretty centrally important yet simultaneously barely explained. As opposed to a Devil Trigger from DMC or a Metal Gear Rising Blade/Ripper mode, Overdrive is basically your style meter of this game. in this case being an all-around stat buff based on your current performance. You hit harder, dodge better, and charge attacks faster once the Autobot symbol is pulsing more frequently, and it increases as you land more hits. It's a lot of fun to utilize well once you get a good rhythm going. Though I will say that it is a bit cryptic, both in how its lack of a proper in-game explanation as well as how little is conveyed in the UI can make it seem a bit unimportant. The first art I found online of people talking about it was someone asking what it was and someone giving the wrong answer because they didn't understand it either. But I do still really enjoy it. It feels like a mechanic to be utilized well and doesn't feel like a bar that you're tempted to conserve and simultaneously isn't just the kill everyone mode. It feels like a neat evolution on the previously mentioned mechanics of other games. Aside from the overall gameplay mechanics, you're also able to play as 5 different characters interchangeably throughout the course of the game. Optimus, Bumblebee, Sideswipe, Wheeljack, and Grimlock. The most obvious disappointment here is that there are no playable Decepticons, but that's a point I want to touch on a bit later. On the plus side, Wheeljack and Grimlock being playable is a real treat. Wheeljack may actually be the weakest playable character in the cast, or maybe just my worst one. I never really found his shield to be useful, but maybe that's just on me.
Let's see how he likes my new shock blast cannon.
But he's a character that I really like and I'm glad to see him here. And being able to play as a giant robot dinosaur is a joy. While it may not be suited to my personal taste, I do like Grimlock's more grappler-based fighting style. It makes him the most distinct character in the cast in terms of playstyle. Each character has their own unique ultimate attack as well as an ability that they can trigger, ranging from an outright attack or something like Sideswipe's Devil May Cry Trickster Dash. There are also a variety of character-exclusive weapons that I want to save for a moment to talk about more in detail later. Between all of the playable characters, I would say that my personal favorite was Prime, who grew on me quite a lot as time went on, followed closely by Sideswipe, who in this game is just Cardante. The characters on the whole aren't radically different from each other, since most of all weapons can largely be used by anyone in the cast, but still feel distinct enough to where your gameplay changes a bit with each one. It does make me wish that they were a bit more and had a few more variable character traits, but I won't complain too much. Even if we were to do an Autobot-only game comprising of characters only from Seasons 1 and 2 of Gen 1, characters like Ironhide, Brawn, Warpath, or Mirage would have been pretty fun to make use of. And that's before even considering ones that could fly.
Move over, blue skies! Here comes old Powerglide! King of the cloud chasers, sultan of the stratosphere, ace of the air!
A large part of this game's campaign takes place on a hub world, along with some more linear underground corridors, which is a bit odd considering that the segments of the hub world are still chapter-based. It's not the most expansive environment for free roaming, which isn't really what this game needs necessarily, but in a way that is completely optional and self-inflicted, I also found it to be a bit annoying to be relocating/solving the same minor puzzles and hidden items over and over, just because the hub world resets for each chapter it's in. It's weird, but again, entirely self-imposed, since I couldn't let optional items remain optional if given no strict incentive to do so. Speaking of the weapons themselves, while they may not seem to be overly important at first, I found that as time went on, they became a very large part of this game, both in regards to using and managing them. In a way, this game began to remind me more of Kid Icarus Uprising with its utilization of weapons more than anything else. The major difference though is that for one, the weapon system in Devastation is a lot simpler and easier to understand, but is simultaneously a lot more tedious to manage, which has almost entirely to do with the far too slim of an inventory capacity compared to that far greater number of weapons regularly received in my opinion. In a game where I can obtain upwards of 50 weapons in a chapter, placing an unchanging capacity of 200 is just way too short. At a point, nearly every time I entered the Ark, I would always be met with the notification that my inventory was full and had to sell 30 plus weapons every time in order to continue playing the game. I don't even think I would mind it as much if the weapons and menus were a bit easier to navigate on the whole. It's always the full list of everything, with no ability to filter, favorite, or mark certain weapons, or select multiple at a time. Additionally, once you start to get an understanding of what weapons are actually valuable to you at a glance, I wish there was a way to immediately sell some of them once you see the list of your haul upon returning to the Ark, since it'd be a shorter list to sift through. It just meant that there were a lot of lengthy segments of me playing this game managing the weapons inventory more than I would have liked, and I feel like could be easily fixed in a potential sequel or remake that will never happen. And perhaps part of that is my fault, given that as I mentioned before I would go for every possible drop I could find and often had weapon rarity and drop text equipped while playing. But what can I say? I wanted stronger weapons and this is how I would get them. I don't want that to completely detract from how enjoyable playing with the weapons is though. I particularly am a big fan of the hammers myself.
Okay, let's kill him. Let's kill this guy. Let's beat him to death with hammers.
Crafting strong weapons and getting really excited for better ones was a lot of fun and made playing on the higher difficulties really entertaining, and not just a white-knuckle experience. They didn't completely remove the challenge, but they did make playing on them a lot more appealing when using the right tools for the job. And that's aside from it just being a lot of fun to see some cool weapons that rarely showed up that wound up being references to other Transformers media or just the toys themselves. The 5 difficulties themselves scale pretty appropriately, with what I would say is the largest leap between Commander and Magnus. where suddenly it feels like you either have to actually think or just mash harder. The difference between Magnus and the highest difficulty Prime actually wasn't as severe as I had expected it to be, though it was still a lot of fun. And thankfully, this game doesn't really have any regular enemies that I would say are particularly frustrating or obnoxious, which can be kind of rare for a game in this genre. Considering that this game is a decade old, I'm not the most concerned with its critical reception, but there have been people who have said that this game is too short. While there is a discussion to be had about the length of a game not necessarily being an equivalent to its value, I also just don't think that a game's length can be solely defined by when it starts and when the credits roll. And a big part of why I say this is because of the challenge mode of this game. While in most DMC games I haven't tried to go too far in Bloody Palace, and I haven't delved too much into Revengeance's VR missions, for this game, however, I have indeed gone through and completed all 50 of this game's challenges scaling up to its highest difficulty, and I love them. They're not all of equal measure, but they are a ton of fun. My favorite challenges in particular are the ones that take the bosses and have you fight multiple of them at once. It manages to create some really interesting and super challenging combat scenarios that don't exist in the main story. They feel like the real height of this game's difficulty, to where going back to the main story feels so much easier. Well worth trying if you enjoy this game and haven't already. The only real complaint I would make in regards to the difficulties, which really only applied when playing on the PS3, is that upon dying far more frequently, it did start to become apparent that the loading screens took just a little longer than I would have liked in order to get back into the gameplay. This wasn't an issue when I managed to obtain a copy for the PS4, which, being more rare, made it a more expensive find. The one I found was apparently stolen from a red box, which I played on a PS5. The game ran a lot better and actually felt a bit harder in my opinion. The way the game would run wound up changing some of the timing windows compared to what I was used to, making things a little less generous. And speaking of dying, a minor gripe that I eventually made peace with is that I wish that the auto-heal items that revive you when you die had the ability to be turned off in the options somewhere. I just don't always want to use them, and were I given the option to, I would have preferred to either not at all and genuinely got better at the combat, or reserve them for instances where they were more necessary, and not just whenever I happened to get careless. One last thing that I wanted to mention was how I feel like based on the ending, this game seemed like it was intended to have some kind of sequel. The whole plot thread of Nova Prime's corruption winds up going basically nowhere, and it's teased at the end that he's still alive. We also end up seeing both Defensor and Superion, two Autobot combiners that didn't actually appear in this game, but I feel like could mirror the usage of Devastator and Menasor as bosses in a different game. It all just feels like there was full intent to have there be a Decepticon sequel of some sort to this game, with there being maybe some conclusive third entry afterwards. I can't say for certain whether or not that's true, but it sure feels like it. It's a shame that we'll never likely be able to see what that could have been. Even so, I can't really be too disappointed, since I'm more happy than anything that the game that we got exists at all. At the end of the day, while I may say that Revengeance is the better game, taking into account its narrative, original characters, and the depth found within it, but I think that after all of this, that Devastation may be the game that I actually enjoy playing more. I certainly haven't been as motivated to spend as much time with Revengeance and its side content as I have with Devastation's entire challenge mode on top of the main story. Much like Revengeance though, one of my favorite parts of the whole experience is the personality that shines through an already incredibly fun game. That and its love for the series it's representing. The callbacks and Easter eggs are one thing, but it's how it manages to capture the spirit of the original series and its characters, while simultaneously being something completely new and memorable, or what makes this game so incredibly special to me. And, you know, of course, the music rocks, dude. What can I say?